All right, 203. We are ready to get going. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Beekly. This is a Beehive product deep dive or product training. I can't remember what I call these anymore, where we are going to dive into the Beehive product and what exists in the product today, how to use different parts of it, what is on the roadmap, meaning coming out in the next month or three, and then what is more of a vision of where we think this can go. So I'll be sharing my screen here. Just a reminder for everyone, love to make these interactive. The Q&A is open, the chat is open. Please ask questions throughout about anything. This is a very transparent place. We always have a competitor or two joining to learn what we got going on, which is all are welcome. All are welcome. So here's what we're going to do today. Quick introduction as to who we are, and then we're going to go through the product roadmap and vision for a few different categories of the software. That is software. I've been doing these webinars for over a year. When I did my first Beehive product deep dive in January of 2025, I think I basically stayed on the same screen for about 30, 40 minutes just because young company, undeveloped software. I've been getting pretty far along. So I'm going to, some parts I'll skip. If you want to go back to them, we can go back to them. But I'll try to be as comprehensive and as nuanced as I can possibly be. So quick introduction for those who don't know, my name is Adriel. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Beehive. We do what's called Enterprise Climate Risk Management, ECRM, which means we help our customers prepare for and respond to natural disasters and comply with relevant regulations. An example of a relevant regulation is something like SB 261 in California that requires something like this thing called a TCFD report. Other countries have similar laws requiring something called an IFRS S2 report, but basically lots of complicated stuff that goes into a disclosure. As you can see here, this is the framework of TCFD. What spits out at the end of it is a report that looks a little bit like this. This is a customer of ours, and what normally takes 4 to 6 months of consulting effort and a lot of money, you can do inside of Beehive in under an hour. So that's a little bit of context, and now we can dive in. Let's move you over here. Okay, so first we're going to start with physical risk assessments. This is sort of the core of Beehive, the foundation of what we do here. So we'll probably spend the most on this particular section. So the problem that we are solving with physical risk assessments is that traditionally they are not data-driven and they are limited in scope. What that means is, this is always varies on how you do this, but many times the way a physical risk assessment happens is a company calls up their consultant and says, hey, consultant, I want to understand what my physical risks are. The consultant says, sure, I know you have 30 offices, 100 facilities, 80 stores, and 4,000 employees. We obviously can't look at the whole world. That's crazy. So we are going to take your 3 most important offices and your flagship store and try to figure out what your exposure is in those areas. And we will come back to you with a spreadsheet that says, for this store, wildfire risk is high and flood risk is low. And in 30 years, wildfire risk is still high and flood risk becomes medium. That's your assessment. Of course, this is not true across the board, but traditionally, it requires a lot of manual research for every location you want to research. And so every additional location is more time and more effort. And so that raises the cost and raises the time. That is the initial thing that we are solving with auditable global risk assessments in seconds. So let's explain how you can do that. So what you're able to do inside of Beehive is upload unlimited assets in multiple categories. What I mean by that, and we won't go through the whole upload process here, but what you're able to do is come in here, you're able to add any type of asset. We have them in 4 categories: facilities, people, supply chain, and customers. And for any one of these, you can create your own. So we have a bunch of templates, offices, factories, warehouses. This is very important to customers. If you call something else, you can create a custom asset type. So if you want to call it a super awesome store, or if you want to say we have a customer with a lot of franchise businesses, you might call it, franchise 1, franchise 2, franchise 3, and maybe each, franchise 1 has 40 locations, franchise 2 has 30 locations. You're able to create these custom assets. So that's right down here. So you come in here, you add assets. You can do this manually or via CSV template. You drop them in here, and you're able to automatically see risks across your whole business in here. A couple things that are new from the last time we did this deep dive. First is we now cover the entire world in one beautiful map. And I'm very excited about this. This is a lot harder than anyone might have imagined, us included. basically everywhere in the world except for, as my chief data officer reminds me, except for Antarctica. Sadly, we don't do risk modeling in Antarctica, is covered with risk models. And what you're able to do is see your whole business all over the world and understand this in a few different ways. And so, I talked about auditable and transparent. You're able to say, hey, I just want to focus on my offices, and specifically my offices that have high exposure to floods. You ever say, great, here's my offices with high exposure to floods. And then you say, oh my goodness, I have 10 offices right in this location that have high flood exposure. Let me zoom in there. So you're able to zoom in here and you say, oh my goodness, I know this location. This is where my most important work happens. And you can dive deeper. And this is where the audit comes from. Where you say, oh, I'm worried about floods in this location. Why is flooding so high? You can come in here and we have what's called an audit trail. So what this does is actually pull some of the science behind these models and tries to bring out some of those most important numbers right to the forefront. And so this gets a little bit sciencey. We hide it a little bit just to say most traditional corporates just want to know there's good science behind it. And so this is how you sort of know that there's some good science behind it. Um, but they don't want to, you might not act differently knowing that there's a 35%, 2% probability that 35% of this area flooded and a 0.5% probability that it's like that's too much nuance, but it's there for you. Some people, maybe some consultants who use Beehive, want that sort of transparency and want to do something with this information, and some corporates don't. But that all appears in this audit trail that you can always access. What's also new is how much transparency we're able to give. So anybody can go to, this is brand new, you can go to docs.bihiveclimate.com. This is a public link, and you can learn a lot about our product and all of our modeling approach. So if you go to the bottom here around methodology, you'll learn exactly how we build climate models, the formulas we use, the databases we reference, the scientific papers we use, where our models come from, and you're able to, as much as you want, research this stuff. You can also do this if you enjoy this product demo and want to share with others or dive in deeper. You can see how our software works, and we kind of go through every single feature in here with a lot of product demos directly in here. This is how you add an asset, kind of like I just showed. And so you're able to sort of explore the entire product and do our best to keep this updated. What's cool inside of the product is that we actually train the AI on everything I just showed you in that docs. So again, go to this flooded office. If you're concerned about why it's flooded and you want to understand how that gets calculated, you could explain to me how flood risk is modeled in New Jersey and show me which assets there are most at risk. And so this will pull from multiple places at once. It'll pull both from our docs, all of this stuff. It'll pull from these actual research papers. So take this science and try to translate it in plain English. It'll pull from your own assets and risk scores. So it'll be relevant specifically to what you've been talking about. And it'll explain itself with links and references and all that. So what's really cool here is that this, if you want that amount of transparency and context, you're able to get that amount of transparency and context. And if you're good with it just knowing it exists there in the background, then great. Happy to tell you that it exists in the background. But if folks have really been pushing this AI to do quite a lot, and we are investing a lot in here. So, we reference everything that it does in New Jersey specifically, how it calculates these risks, what these scores mean, uncertainty levels, all that. So, some really cool stuff happening there. All right, we'll talk about custom equations. We'll talk about snapshots in a moment. Great. Okay, so there's a few other ways to understand risk. And just a reminder, keep this very interactive. Feel free to throw in questions into the Q&A or the chat. But this map is cool. Maps are beautiful and interesting and very helpful, but not everyone wants to see a giant global map. There's a bunch of other ways to get data. So if you say, oh my God, this is my most important office or factory or facility, I need to send this information to somebody who manages that particular facility, you're able to do that. There's this little download button here. You download that risk report, it pops up right here, and then all that science and all those scores appear in this PDF. So a very easy way to pull out on a per asset basis what those risks are. If you want to do a deeper analysis on your own, you can pull all this stuff into a table format, and you can export all this as a spreadsheet to do your own analysis. Obviously, you can filter directly in here, and you can kind of do whatever you want there. But if you want to pull it out into a spreadsheet and do your own analysis there, you are able to do that. Now, a lot of what the analysis is, and this is actually for those who've been kind of around for a while, this table is the first thing we had. The map and the table sort of came together. And what we would do a lot of is export it, create a bunch of charts, email those charts to people. So we said all those charts should probably be embedded directly in Beehive. So you're able to get a variety of charts that people were trying to do in spreadsheets. We basically brought right in here. So if you want to say, hey, by country, I want to understand how my offices are impacted specifically by which ones have high or medium flood. There you go. You have 32 offices in the US with high flood, some in the UK, some in France. If you want to say, well, what I'm really worried about is heat waves. So I want to understand which of my assets in Europe, that example, I guess, in North America, have the most exposure to heat waves. Here's how you're able to see that. And again, all of these are downloadable, so you can very quickly put them into any of your internal reports, which is very helpful. And these buttons over here are brand new. Okay, next thing we'll talk about is impact. There's a lot of really cool stuff here that is new and some things that are actively changing. So this will feed into the roadmap a little bit. So the next obvious question is, okay, so great. You told me that I have, 437 assets at high risk. Very scary. That's a lot of assets. You told me that 251 of them are at risk from floods. Oh no, floods sound scary. What does that actually mean to me? Like, should I be concerned? What if these 251 assets at risk of floods are empty buildings that you don't even care about? Or what if this one asset, or I guess six assets at risk from wildfire, is actually your most important data center, where if it's down for even an hour because of a wildfire or because of too much smoke, you lose tens of millions of dollars. Just saying, oh, well, six is less than 251 is not enough. And so what you're able to do is actually quantify this risk and see what those values turn out to be. So here's how you do that. The logic behind what I'm about to show you is if you were to hire a really great consultant, if you got a big four consultant and you wanted to say, hey, consultant, quantify this risk for me. If I know that I have some AWS data centers exposed to heat waves or some employees exposed to cyclones, what would that mean? They basically build out a spreadsheet with a bunch of equations. Like, well, if an employee is impacted by a cyclone, what does that mean? Maybe that means they can't work, which maybe means some sort of productivity loss or some revenue loss or revenue costs associated with it. But if a data center is impacted by a heat wave, maybe that means energy costs spike for a day. Or maybe if it's impacted by a cyclone, there might be an outage for an hour, which means energy costs don't actually spike, but there might be downtime, which might cost contract problems because you'd have to pay your customers. So all these different assets interact with different hazards in different ways. And the consultant would run this big project and tell you, hey, here's all the different ways in which um, your assets might cost you money. What we did is we actually brought that equation building process directly into Beehive. So let's give the example of offices. You'd say, I want to create, I have so many, they'll call it Office 55. And we want to create an equation specifically for an office. You can come in here and build that equation. And now you might think to yourself, well, what happens if an office is hit by a disaster? Well, probably there's some sort of like cost per closure day that comes in, multiplied by the number of closure days per event. And maybe I own my offices. So there's also some sort of like repair cost that comes in per event. And this is how I want to think about this exposure. And maybe if you lease your offices, you ignore these. So you can build out these equations directly in here. Now, maybe you don't know exactly what to do. Well, we have a bunch of templates directly in here. So you'll see I have a bunch here created by Beehive. Basically, everyone starts off with these. So we're like, I wonder how Beehive made an equation related to offices. You come in here, edit that, say, oh, that's pretty close, but I want to add something to this, or oh, I want to duplicate them and make some changes. So you're able to do that. The other thing that you're able to do in here, and this is new, is you're able to use AI to build your equation. So maybe you want to say something like, uh, offices might close and I might have to fix them if something breaks, whatever. Let's see what happens. This has been iffy lately, kind of a new feature. So then You make a little prayer to the AI gods and you see what it spits out. Maybe it'll be good, maybe it'll be bad. There you go. Actually, not bad. Actually, very good. I'm very proud. Did cost per closure day times the closure days per year plus a recurring per square asset times it got creative and actually did what's called an ownership type multiplier, meaning it said, well, if you own it versus lease it, there might be different balances, right? If you own it, you fix it yourself. If you lease it, you tell your landlord to fix it. Or if you rent it, or if it's a co-working space, doesn't matter at all. It's times zero because for a WeWork, it would be times zero. But for your corporate HQ, it would be times one, meaning you definitely have that repair cost. So it did a pretty good job. So you can accept and proceed and go on from there. Cool, 220. So that's how you do some of the equation work. I'm not going to dive into all of this, but there's a bunch of ways to like adjust these numbers, like what is the cost per closure day, what is the closure days per year. You're able to do all that. Happy to share if people ask about it, but in the interest of time, we'll move on. Um, for the roadmap, one thing that we're doing is right now this equation builder is in three steps, as you can obviously see. First, you name it, then you build it. You build whatever it is. Let's just build something here times 30 days per event. You build whatever it is, and then you go and you confirm it. We're consolidating all that into one step, which will just make it a little neater and simpler. So that is something that should be out in just a couple of weeks. And that improvement will be really, really great. The other things that we're working on in here across physical risk is we want to bring, right now, you'll see this AI here exists on the insights page, the map page, and the risk scores page. That's where we're really confident about what it's answering. It does not yet exist on any other pages, including impact. So something we're working on right now is adding all these impact values and all these dollar values into that AI. So you can also ask, and what might this event cost me? Or what happens if I doubled my cost per closure rate? Or what if what could be the cost if I added a new office in Spain? What might happen? So you'd be able to do all that. So that is something coming on the horizon. As for hazards and scenarios, right now we covered three scenarios, SSP1, SSP3, SSP5. We are adding, oops, why did my screen stop sharing? Let me try that again. Sorry. I'm going to click the plug here. There we go. I think we're back. We are adding a 1.5 degree scenario, which is required by some regulations like the Australian climate risk regulations. So that'll be out by the end of May. And then we are probably going to add winter storms as our next hazard. Right now, we cover these five hazards, and we will be adding winter storms. This question often comes up, so I'll answer it preemptively. This is kind of technically a little bit more than five hazards. Many companies or many models split out drought and water scarcity into two hazard types, and they split out flood into pluvial flooding, riverine flooding, and I think flash flooding. We basically combine them all. So we don't think you as a business care why there's a drought, whether it's climate related, meaning it hasn't rained in a month, or human related, meaning people are pulling water out of the ground at a faster rate than it's depleting. You just care there's not enough water. I don't think you care why there's a flood. Did sea level rise or did it rain a lot? You just care that there was a flood. So that's kind of an example of philosophically what we try to do a lot is bring you really good science, but bring it in a way that makes sense for a business. Like I think if a business person went to a CFO or the head of operations and said, "Oh, I'm concerned about pluvial flooding over riverine flooding," I think they'd be like, "All right, sounds sciencey. I don't know what to do with that." If you say, "I think there's going to be too much water in our basement," they'll say, "Oh, got it. I just hopefully you're using some good science there, but I'm worried about water in my basement." So I know we're trying to dumb it down a little bit, almost like I've never drawn this before, so let's just pull it up. I don't know if you guys know the nitwit meme, but cracks me up. Where can I find it? Oh, sorry, this one, the midwit meme. Basically, the simplest way of doing something and the smartest way of doing something are often the same. And then there's like very, very clever way of doing something. We are kind of trying to be this guy or this guy, not this guy. So that's our approach. Um, Midwit, not nitwit. Okay. So that's our last comic strip for the day. Okay, I think that's the main stuff here. We'll skip the vision for whatever vision. There's lots of different hazard types from storms to sea level rise and 1,000 other things that we don't cover. There's 28 technically total. We're going to cover more and more of them. Okay. Let's talk about transition risks and opportunities because there's some really cool new stuff in here. So the problem that we're solving here is that traditionally this tabletop transition risk exercise that companies need to do is very time consuming and not very database. So specifically for those who don't know, one thing that you need to do, I should pull this up here. I think I'll find it here. Yeah, there you go. So there's this work that you need to do to comply with many of these laws called the transition risk and opportunity assessment. And there's these four types of risks and five types of opportunities. The way to really think about it is what are the risks and opportunities to your business and an economy impacted by climate change? And there's a bunch of rules and guidance around that. The traditional approach, the consultant goes and learns about your business. They read your 10K, they read some benchmarks, they read what your competitors have said, they talk to all of your executives, then they go back and they think, it's my consulting impression. What? What? Talking to the screen for now is weird. What might a technology company be worried about on the policy angle as it is affected by climate change? How might changing technologies, changing markets impact a plastics manufacturer? What resource efficiency opportunities does a car company have? And they think really hard about all these things and then come back to you, the client, and say, oh, here's a few things I think you should consider. It's fine. It just takes a very long time. And because it's time and person hours, it can be fairly expensive. What we did in Beehive is we trained AI to do a lot of this work for you. And so that same experience that a consultant goes through, learn about the business, understand benchmarks, come up with risks and opportunities, adjust them based on feedback. And then this last step of, well, actually, let me pause there. That same process, we want to recreate in AI. So we give the AI a bunch of information about your business, emissions, ESG reports, 10Ks, whatever else is in here. We train it on who do you think your peers are. So what have your peers and competitors said about these risks and opportunities? Any other additional information you want to give it? And then the AI comes back with here's a bunch of risks and opportunities that I think are relevant to your business. I think you have an opportunity. Let's do risk. I think you have a risk around stakeholder concerns. And here's why the AI thinks you have this risk. And here's an example of peers that have talked about stakeholder scrutiny or reputational risk or stakeholder concern in their own language. This, by the way, was a huge effort because everyone, as you can see here, even these three I showed you, talk about reputation risk in different ways. And so we via a lot of AI and a lot of manual work, basically tagged them all and said, oh, all of these are basically kind of saying something about stakeholder concern. So let's put them into this stakeholder concern bucket. And you marked S&P as a peer, and the other ones you did not mark as peer. So you can weigh those differently. But whatever, here's what your peers think. And then we go through this with you, the client. We say, yep, like you say, yeah, I agree. I accept this. This is a reasonable risk to me. Or no. I think this one's totally not true. I'm going to exclude this from the assessment or reject it. All fine. And then what we do is AI drafts language that actually describes this in a format relevant to you. So in this step, it just said shifting consumer preferences. Here's what that means generically. And here's how this might impact Beehive so you understand why we picked it. In this step, it says, here's how you might talk about this risk. Actually, let's go back here. Here's how you might talk about changing consumer demand specifically for Beehive, because again, this is all kind of muddled because I have so many fake 10Ks in my demo account here. But like, you have corporate clients and we're a software company. So you know that enterprise procurement cares about this stuff. So here's how it might impact Beehive. So it pulls all that through, and that traditional many month process that happens with consultants happens in just a few minutes here. And what you, the final user, are able to do here is adjust this language. So if you don't like it, you change it. If you don't like it, you change it however you want. You're able to benchmark. So you're able to say, I really respect, S&P Global. They're a peer of mine. How did they phrase it? Oh, I like this phrasing. I'm going to take this phrasing. I'm going to use that myself. You're able to do all that. You're able to actually go to their report. So if you click this button, this will pull up S&P's report. And this particular phrase comes on page 15, as you can see here. So you can go find it on page 15 to get context. So you're able to do some of that benchmarking. Now, the next really difficult thing here is what's called scenario analysis. And now this is required by any regulation that requires IFRS S2 reporting. Where you can say, sure, there's this risk around changing consumer demands and behaviors. But under what scenario does this risk really become an issue? And there's what's called the Network for Greening the Financial System, the NGFS. And this is basically this kind of research group that said, here's all the different things that might happen through 2050. And what the normal experience is, you might be seeing a pattern here. As a consultant says, all right, I'm going to research, I'm actually pull it up, NGFS. I'm going to research the NGFS. I'm going to research all their different scenarios. I'm going to like research all these papers and understand how these different risks matriculate and look at all these documents or whatever and like come up with, hey, for you, software company or automotive company or plastics company, here's how this risk might matriculate. It's more likely under this thing's a beast of a website. I don't even know where to find it exactly, but there's, it's more likely to matriculate under a net zero scenario where customers really, really care. But under a scenario where, hey, it turns out we were wrong and no one cares about climate change, it's probably not an issue. Doing all that research and writing it all up takes a very long time. We trained the AI on that. So we taught the AI, we have these prompts that are dozens and dozens of pages long about each of these different scenarios. What is the low demand scenario? What is the net zero scenario? What is the current policies scenario? And you're able to say, okay, the ones I really care about are, you can do all seven if you want, but the I really care about this net zero 2050 scenario on the best possible basis, or the current policy scenario, which is like sort of where we're headed. How do the risks and opportunities identified in the last step adjust under these scenarios? And so we can do this live if you want, but we'll run scenario and then you'll see what I'm about to do. That'll take, I don't know, 20, 40 seconds is normally a many month project requiring a lot of man hours of understanding all these things. And we'll took the risks that we accepted here. So you'll see in this step, we approved two risks. So it took those two risks and it said, well, under net zero or low demand or current policies, here's how these risks evolve and matriculate. So it did all that in a very short time. Now, important thing here, we're not necessarily saying this is better or worse or different or just ground truth or you need to take it and trust it and move right along. I think you should always question AI in the same way you should always question your vendor. Just because some hotshot 24-year-old who just got his MBA internship, just got his MBA, is interning at KPMG, doesn't mean they are right or wrong about the risk that they've identified. They're very smart. They worked really hard. They thought a lot about this. They just came up with some stuff. This is the beginning of a discussion. And you take this discussion and you can export it out of here and bring it in house and say, do we think, which of these do we think is the most likely scenario? And are we concerned about this? Should we act? We're really worried about this current policy scenario. And oh my God, like there's market share loss that might come from these things. Obviously, I just did this, so I haven't read this. But if there's market share loss, like we should talk about this. Like I think there could be market share loss, and it gets you thinking. But if you disagree or if you want to change things, whatever, you can go back and make some adjustments. So that's how this works. And that whole NGFS scenario thing is brand new, and there's a lot that we're doing around it to continue to make it better. Cool. I think we'll skip some of that stuff for now. One thing that was also on the roadmap, so we have this goal. I don't know if we'll hit it, but it's a goal to bring this AI throughout the entire platform by the end of the quarter, which for us is the end of April. Quarter starts February 1st. In 6 weeks, I don't know if we'll get there, but whatever. Worst case, we're off by a month. What that looks like here is the ability to say, okay, interesting risk. AI, can you tell me how I compare against my five biggest peers and tell me what risks are missing that have not been identified that S&P has said or that US Bank has said or whatever. And it'll basically pull in all these different risks that everyone has said and say, well, here's what you're really missing. Here's where the biggest concerns are. Here's where the biggest problems are. And you'll be able to do that. So embedding the AI in there will be very, very helpful. Okay. Still with me. I like it. All right. Talking about the vision quickly. So we obviously quantification is very important in physical risk, and it's clear. So it's difficult, but it's clear how it happens. Hurricane hits, data center goes down, you lose money. In transition risks, there is an effort to quantify, but it's a little trickier to do. Like, how do you put a dollar value on the risk of investor and lender preferences changing. I don't know. Like, could you say your cash position would decrease because it's harder to get a loan and you wouldn't be able to invest and therefore revenue drops, or you'd have to keep more like it's difficult to quantify. How do you quantify changing consumer demands? Well, maybe you say under a scenario where consumers want more sustainability work, but we do not invest in sustainability work, we sell 5% fewer goods. Maybe that's reasonable to do, but it's tricky. The one that is very quantifiable, no, by the way, if that's what you want to quantify, we basically say, hey, we'll do our best for you, but we'll try to kind of solve that through customer success, or maybe you should hire a consultant just to quantify the ones that are most important to you. But the one we really believe we can quantify is, I don't know if I have it in here, but a carbon tax. Often, excuse me, oftentimes companies say that there's a risk of a carbon tax impacting their company. That's more in like emissions intensive industries or not software services. But you can quantify that. You can say, hey, here's the proposed carbon tax in every country on Earth, and here's your emissions in all of those countries. And if those carbon taxes came to be, you don't have to pay X amount of dollars in taxes. So that's something we do want to quantify and will at some point. Okay, so that's a bit around transition risks. Let's talk about reporting. And again, feel free to chime in with any questions. Who's still here? Cool. Oh, hey, Michael. All right, great. So let's talk about reporting. So the problem is writing climate risk compliance report takes a very long time. I showed you this example of a TCFD. No, that's not it. I showed you this example of a TCFD report. This is a customer of ours. It was 13 pages long. Here's an example of an IFRS report. That's from PwC. This one is 65 pages long. I think it's PwC, so they're sort of like probably using this as a sales document to be like, look how hard this is. It's 65 pages. Hire us for $500,000 to do it for you. But regardless, these things are long. IFRS is a very complicated framework. What you are able to do inside of Beehive is automate the drafting of both these types of reports. And so up until now, we supported TCFD, which is what was required under California and CDR in the UK and many other jurisdictions. Without getting too in the weeds, TCFD is now adopted by IFRS. But what you're able to do is for any one of these TCFD questions, come in here and let me delete this. Come in here, sorry, and actually draft a response. Let me do this one. Come in here and draft a response to any of these questions. So you're able to say, I put in all these documents, I did all this work around climate risk inside of Beehive. Let me draft an answer to any one of these. And just like with the rest of the software, you're able to benchmark. So you're able to say, oh, I really comp against CVS. How does CVS answer this? Oh, wow, they wrote a lot more than me. Maybe if I want to be more like CVS, I should write a lot more. How did Gilead answer? Oh, well, this is what they did for this question and this question and this question and this question. Let me kind of compare my own answers to what it is that they did in all these questions. So all that exists for TCFD. And then at the end, basically you draft all these answers. There's a bunch of version control in here. So you can, AI can draft the first one, then maybe our team edits it, then your lawyer edits it, then you edit it, and you go all the way through. And so that's how you kind of review that. And then at the end of the day, you see a full draft and you can export it or finalize it in here. A couple of things that are new. This one's small, but really cool. You'll see that version 10 over here is now called the draft. What you're able to do is if you scroll over any one of these versions, you see this small check mark appearing on the right. And that approves a version. So maybe your general counsel or your final reviewer or whatever comes in here and says, oh, yeah, like this is the best version for this question. I'm going to lock it. I'm going to approve it. So now when you go to your full draft, you'll see question 3 has this approved state. Oh, sorry, this question 3. Question 3 is this approved version. This is what we said is the thing we're going to answer. Whereas this one is still in draft. So clearly someone should go to this question, review it and say, do I like this one? Do I like this one? Well, maybe what I want to do is make some edits here, restore version, make some edits here and change this, save this and lock that one. So this kind of locking experience is now finalized in here, which is very cool. The next thing that is brand new, and this is a huge effort, and it's going to be a big part of our roadmap, is the ability to create an IFRS report. IFRS has 2 aligned report. So yeah, this is this one, this thing that PwC did. The way that works is you come into reports, you click create report, you go to IFRS S2, you name it something. So maybe name it like Australia IFRS report. It looks like that already exists. I've done this down before. Australia report 2. It's an IFRS report. It is being used to comply with the Australian regulation. And then you're able to say, the documents I want AI to reference are this one and this one. I want it to be my Australia specific emissions, not my global 10K or whatever. So you're able to reference specific documents to tell the AI for Australia, just focus on this Australia specific document. Or maybe it's a global report, so then they will all be checked by default. Whatever. So you can do that. You create a report. I'm not going to do that now because I have so many in here, as you can tell. Which, by the way, new feature, you can now archive it. They'll appear in the icons. You can delete it out of here, delete permanently. So nice way to kind of manage those drafts and controls. You can say, great, this one is something we published, so I'm going to mark it as published. It's like this one's been finalized. Now, I'm pretty sure, yeah, okay. This one's been finalized, so great. That one's actually been published and finalized. So IFRS, let's go here. IFRS is a beast. This thing is giant if you haven't looked at it, and IFRS S2 is required under most jurisdictions that are now doing TCFD. Even if you go to the DCFD website, you actually see that on their homepage. As of 2023, it has been incorporated into the IFRS foundation. So IFRS S2 is sort of the direction all of this is going, and every climate risk regulation that is out there will now be subscribed to IFRS. There's the same 4 sections, so it seems deceptively simple. But under these sections are many, many questions. I think there's over 100 questions that you have to respond to under IFRS. There's a ton. And our first step was to organize all of these questions into the software. And so you can come in here and answer all of these questions. Now, what you're able to do is for any one of these questions you're looking at, click into it and say, some of these questions, you can see there's a 22A, 1 and 2, like there's subsections to these. Some of these questions have subsections to the subsections, excuse me. So not only 22A, but it's 22A1 and 22A2. And so for a lot of these questions, some of them don't have subsections, it's just 9A, and some of them do. So what's a beast? Let me see. I think this one actually. Yeah, this one's got 5 subsections, sub requirements, excuse me. So for your answer for board oversight, you actually need to touch upon all 5 of these requirements. So we just launched this, and now you can see the entire IFRS draft that you're able to create in here, and you can see how many questions there are actually in here. It is a lot. So I'm very proud that this first step is out. Now, what can you not do? Well, you do not see a generate response with AI button in here. That does not exist. That is because our first step was to allow you to manually draft your answer in here, save it, go through the versions, do all that stuff. A big part of the roadmap, basically a major part of our roadmap for the next 2 or 3 months, is bit by bit incorporating the generate with AI button into each of these questions. And our goal is that basically in the next 3 months, by the end of June, you're able to generate this entire report, the whole thing with AI inside of Beehive. And you will do that just as quickly as you could do the TCFD report. For the few of you, for the couple of you there who are existing customers, the experience for TCFD was basically you come in here, you give us some documents before we kick off, you give us your assets, we do a bunch of stuff, we have our kickoff call together, and you immediately have your draft TCFD report on the very first call. It is magical. It's there immediately because a combination of software and AI and our human oversight got you to that point. That is going to be very difficult to do with IFRS S2, but that is sort of the ambition. And we're going to tackle this in the same way that we tackled TCFD, where actually approximately a year ago, we launched sort of an empty version of TCFD. So you could manually write TCFD. And bit by bit by bit, we brought in this generate response button so that it would generate an actual response. And by, I think, basically mid-April of last year, you were able to do all of TCFD with AI, and then we continue to improve it. That was a huge part of the effort for the next few months is to do all of it with AI in here. And it will not be easy, but check in next month and we'll have checked off a lot of it. Cool. By the way, AI, another part of the roadmap, is the same AI that you see in here needs to exist in reports. So you can ask questions like, what are some ways I can improve my answer? Or, I love how, yeah, actually a customer asked us for this yesterday. They were like, hey, I love how General Motors answered this question. Can I just tell the AI, make my answer more like General Motors and give it that prompt? Right now, you can't do that. You should be able to do that. Obviously, that is something that is on the roadmap. Okay. There we go. And IFRS, cool. So that's a big, big piece of the roadmap. Great. Happy to answer any questions. And then we're going to dive into the very last piece here. Okay, the very last piece here is around how do you actually plan and respond for natural disasters. Everything we talked about today is about an assessment. It's about, hey, in theory, here's what wildfire looks like in America. Hypothetically, I have 43 offices at risk of flooding. If I were to analyze it, I've got about $38 million worth of exposure, mostly from data centers, all in theory. And all that flows into disclosure and assessments, which is all very important. But what we want to do is enable companies to move out of this hypothetical assessment as quickly as possible and into actual risk management. So, what does that look like? That looks like having good governance of potential natural disasters and hazards before they happen and making sure that you have the business continuity plans, the trainings all in place to be able to say, hey, I think a hurricane might happen next month. I know we have these 13 assets that are in the path of a potential hurricane. I want to make sure that the person who runs those offices, the person who takes care of those employees, the person who watches those data centers is aware of that. And by the way, hurricane season in the Southeast US is the fall, but hurricane season in Southeast Asia is the spring. So I need to train different people at different times of year. They're prepared for their own problems. How do you do that today? It is really difficult, and companies employ big consultants, or they sort of mostly just deal with the millions of dollars they lose due to natural disasters. And after the fact, after they happen, like, oh no, the LA wildfire hit, or a hurricane knocked out the North Carolina IV plant, or Southeast Asia is flooded and we can't get our goods out of port. You just deal with it. So what you're able to do inside of Beehive is you're able to say, okay, in a given period of time, let's say I'm focused on next quarter, March through May, which natural disasters are likely to happen? And if they did happen, how much money could I lose? And so what we did is we cataloged thousands of hurricanes and millions of wildfires and tagged them by where they happened and when they happened. So we can come to you and say, hey, if I were you, actually, let's do hurricanes, more interesting. If I were you in March through May, I would be particularly worried about Southeast Asian hurricanes. And I'd be worried about them because here's some recent hurricanes that happened. And here are your assets that could be impacted by that. And if I want to filter by impact, here's the ones that would have the highest impact. I've got this data center here with 100, ignore these numbers maybe, but $170 million of exposure, followed by this GCP data center, followed by a lot of employees. And oh, wow, looks like a lot of employees. Let me see all my employees who could be impacted by Southeast Asian hurricanes, specifically in March through May. And wow, that's crazy. Now, why do I think that? Well, here's actual hurricanes that happened in Southeast Asia. You can go look up Cyclone Layla and see that it happened in May 2010. Cyclone Alberto, see that it hit Eastern North America in 2018. And what we're able to show you is that if Cyclone Alberto happened today, you would have 26 assets at risk. And what companies really like about this is not projections and this is not hypothetical. And this is not like, I wonder what a climate model might say. What this allows you to do is to go to these owners of these 26 assets and say, did you know that there was a hurricane there 7 years, 8 years ago? That could happen again this May. Do we have a good plan? Do we have business continuity plans? Actually, like if I'm looking at Eastern North America, there's some filters coming. We'll talk about the roadmap, but I'm looking at Eastern North America. Like that seems to be a big deal. And actually, South Asia, like I said, it depends on the time of year. South Asia, or South East, yeah, there you go, Southeast Asia. Look, there's this hurricane that happened in South Asia, this hurricane that's happened in South Asia, this hurricane that happened in South Asia. It looks like every couple of years, there's a major hurricane in South Asia that affects my assets. Do we have a plan for that? Because that is likely to happen again. So that is a very, very big deal. And so customers are very excited about the ability to actually say, here's real disaster that might impact me. And then let me bring that to my teams, make sure they are prepared, make sure they have good business continuity plans. This product is brand new, is very exciting, is getting a ton of work. So the roadmap here is huge. We want to add filters to be able to allow you to understand this data more clearly. We want to be able to allow you to export this right into a basically a deck where you'd be able to say, hey, tell my CFO about my Southeast Asian risk exposure and suggest three things that we might want to understand. Make that into a PowerPoint deck that I'd be able to share right away. Be able to like ask the AI right in here, hey, summarize for me my five most at risk assets because they've been impacted more than 5 years ago. So maybe no one's been trained on what to do about it because nobody worked here more than 5 years ago. Whatever. A lot we are doing with this thing. But the core feature here, the core technology we built is tagging millions of events by where they happened, would they intersect with some of your assets, and when they happened, meaning what were the exact dates and locations of Hurricane Layla, so that you can have some context to say, here's what I'm worried about and when. This is very cool. I'm very excited about this, and this is going a long way. Okay. Um, yeah, we'll talk more about that later. So that is the big deep dive into Beehive. I can go on forever into this. I'm happy to take any questions at all about the product as it is today, the roadmap, any challenges we have, ways you can learn more as you guys think about questions. I just wanted to share. I'm going to drop this into the chat, but we do webinars basically every single week. So here's a list of all of our webinars. Next week, I'm very excited. I'm interviewing Dylan Mayer from Braze. He's the ESG manager at Braze. But as you can see here, we've got events coming up, interviewing folks from ChargePoint, from Universal Music Group, from Unity. Actually, Lyft is on here somewhere. I think we moved. There you go. Lyft is in June. Russell Reynolds. We do these demos from Box. Those are all going to be really, really cool. There's one also I wanted to plug in here. There we go. How climate models work. This one is always very well attended in May. I know it seems like forever away, but I interview Ed Knudsen, who's the chief data officer at Beehive, about how we build climate models. So it's a really good opportunity for just folks to learn how these things get built and ask a scientist. And then the last thing I want to share, I'll put this in the links as well. So if you want to learn more about the product, and there's a lot of demos in here, the docs are very helpful. And then if you come to our homepage, you'll find a lot of free resources, but I'm very proud of these courses. And so there's two courses in here, one that teaches you about enterprise climate risk management, and can build good governance and good and what the regulatory landscape works, just like what this looks like inside of a company. And the other one is how risk modeling works, how climate models work. So if you just want to learn about the science, this is a great way to learn about the science. So that was quite a lot. I'm going to pause there for now, stop sharing my screen, and happy to answer any questions. Okay, no problem. Um, y'all know where to find me. It's just Adriel at biclimate.com. So feel free to reach out anytime. We do this product deep dive about once a month. So if you want to follow along and see how these features evolve, that'd be great. Perfect. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. All right. If there's anything else, please reach out anytime. And hopefully this was interesting and helpful to you all. Thank you. Bye.